Marx predicted many things, and kinda failed in all of them, but what if I told you that one thing he got almost right, just missed by 150 years, and that thing is the precarious position of workers? In the early decades of the Industrial Revolution, from 1800 to 1850, real wages remained frozen, even as factories bust with unprecedented productivity. For half a century, generation after generation of workers sold their labor for no increase in living standards. Instead, they endured the nightmare of what will be later called wild capitalism.
Sold solely.
COLH.
호드니.
Well, at least our AI Fred got the cash part right, so maybe he does know something about capitalism after all? Anyway, the period is called the Angel's Pause, and to study how it misled the entire school of thought and why we don't live in a hellhole, at least yet, we will dive deep into memes and 19th century and conduct some casual learning. These people are called Marxists. They follow Marx. Karl Marx, that is. So they read books of Marx, Engels, sometimes Marx and Engels. Once in the millennia they even bother to look at non-Marxist leftist work, but mostly just Marx and Engels. In early 20th century, certain guys which actually held power, like Lenin, Stalin or Mao, tried to develop basic Marxist ideas into their own isms, such as Leninism and the like. Some say it's legit fanfiction, others than it's non-canon, but they are perceived as basically a joke in academia, so forget about them. There is also neo-Marxism, like Frankfurt School, and post-Marxism, about which nobody cares, and by nobody I mean me. You know the basics. This is the leftist ideology. Left is the opposite of right, which means that Marxists can't be right, and we can end the video here. It's pretty easy to understand. Basically, oppressors bad, the oppressed good. Communism is inevitable because of economic-based demands which require respective social structure, and modern mode of mass production is naturally collective, so the legacy superstructure which favored private ownership will die. But how did we get here? Well, that's where the Marxist world building comes in. In the beginning, God created... that's from other religion, sorry. In the beginning of mankind, everything was great. Grass was green, skies were blue, people, kinda existed. I mean, it's prehistoric time, we don't have much evidence to speak of. But believe me, everything was good. You see, even SCP-096 wasn't evil back then. But...
Here comes the money!
And everything goes haywire. Inequality, war, slavery, exploitation, EA games, AI art, evil SCP-096. Everything wrong with this world started after the fall of prehistoric communism. As to why, the general idea was that hunter-gatherers couldn't accumulate wealth because of constant migrating, but once they settled, the accumulation became possible. That promoted certain people to elite status, which then kicked off the Matthew effect, cementing their position, which in turn...
2 hours later.
In the early modernity, the merchant class, also known as
bourgeoisie,
became prominent because of Age of Discovery and colonialism. They overthrew feudal lords during 19th century revolutions and established capitalism as the ruling formation. But now, because of division of labor and the expand of industry, the workers are gaining power. They will rise against the oppressors and defeat their flagship in Sector 8, which will bring communism and the end of mankind's suffering. But you know how it went. International solidarity? I would better stick to my nation. Revolution in the most advanced economies? Here, hold these paradigms of industrialization and higher standard of living, such as China, Cambodia, and the other not so very well developed countries. You may have noticed that I omitted Russia from this list, and that's on purpose. I will have a video about the so-called backward Tsarism later. Okay, they failed with the global revolution, but what about the nations Marxists built themselves? Democracy? Ditch that bourgeois nonsense, we have only dictatorship here. Dictatorship of the proletariat. That's why we have a wide variety of options for voting, akin to that of the late Soviet grocery store. You can vote for a communist, another communist, or against them. And if you don't agree, you go to Gulag, a mental hospital, because only criminals and mentally ill people can be against us. Freedoms? You can't leave your current residence without permission. And can't leave the country at all. I mean, you already live in the best country in the world, so why would you want to ditch it anyway? A little side story. There is a Russian song, Why This My Motherland, where it's sung that I know of no other country where a man can breathe so freely. And widespread Soviet joke was, of course you don't, you have never been abroad. Even the sacred cow of economic equality became somewhat tarnished, as the nomenklatura, Soviet bureaucratic class, distanced itself from the masses with their own Berezka stores and simplified access to high-quality imported goods, and also several political advantages. Sure, you can state that the real socialism has never been achieved, but then you must also admit that the ideal versions of other systems have never been tried, and that's not even counting the fact that unlike, let's say, more authoritarian and defined ideologies, the so-called capitalism has never been defined in the first place by people who are often perceived as capitalists. So let's judge the ideology by its actual results and try to understand why did it underperform.
My daddy was a miner and I'm a miner's son.
Now, you may think that I don't like Marxists, and well, you will be right, but it's not hatred, rather I believe that they are very much overrated. Sure, they did contribute to social sciences and created some great music. But it is outweighed by tons of casualty and other evil doings their spiritual successors caused. The uniqueness of Marxism is that this is one's purely scientific paradigm that became basis for one of the most sectarian and non-pluralist ideologies out there. One of Lenin's quotes is that Marxism is all-powerful because it is right. That's the level of confidence his successors had. The only other strong contender for such a position is scientific racism, which heavily influenced fascism. Marxist and fascist thought have many similarities because of their rather similar genesis, but I will talk about it in another video. The era was full of optimism and hope for the progress, and as physics and chemistry spearheaded scientific advancement, sociology, history and psychology, I omitted political science and economics because they will gain modern form later, tried to copy them and uncover objective quote causes for social processes. This obsession with everything scientific led to a grave mistake. I believe that there is the right answer in social sciences, a mistake even a high schooler or a diligent freshman would not make today. On the first glance, Marx did everything he could at the time, delved into most relevant data, used the latest advancements in nascent social sciences to support his grand theory of history. But he was only human after all. So he thought that he did in fact unveil the universal forces driving the history of the mankind. And oh boy, was he wrong.
Now ain't I right?
As we discussed previously, Marx's forecast never materialized, and I think the context of the time has a lot to do with it. Imagine you are an intellectual living in the mid-19th century. Marx started working on his magnum opus Das Kapital in the late 1850s. Remind you, you witnessed the misery of the workers, first massive financial crisis in mankind's history, the rise of various labor movements, national revolutions even. No wonder you would start to think that this system is pretty cooked already. Although you should also question yourself if there is a system to begin with, but that's for another video. Okay, so you see all the depressing stuff. Now the question is, why does it happen? Marx believed that the class struggle is at fault here. The wages would stay low and the capital will be profitable because the bourgeoisie has every incentive to do so. Crisis will happen because nobody checks capitalist power, and only through social Darwinistic acts of elimination do they go back on track, drowning workers with them of course. Labor movements will get crushed. Or left unanswered, I'm looking at huge artists because they have a disadvantaged bargaining position, and the state is able to repress them as it is ruling class watchdog. And during Marx's life, reform wasn't a very common way to address social problems, you know. If you wanted to get things done, you took a weapon, be it a pitchfork or a musket, and got what you wanted by force. That's why revolution remained as the only solution in Marx's eyes, although he did accept peaceful options later, but his more hardcore followers did not. But I dubbed this section the mistake, and for a reason. Marx's theory sounds credible, but not everything coherent and presumably logical turns out to be right in the end. There were always those believable but ultimately false theories. For example, the "oh look, people get sick where the air is bad, so it must be that air causing it," also known as miasma theory, or the "wow, sun moves while I stand, so the earth must be the center of the universe," also known as geocentrism. People even died trying to debunk them. Although, of course, any pre-modern repression pales in comparison to 20th century totalitarian regimes. So in general, Marx thought that the problem was mainly political. That's where the modern economists disagree. They think that it was mostly caused by economic factors. And here we go after more than 10 minutes of introduction. The angel's pause. So remember the graph I showed earlier? This situation was not exclusive to Britain. It occurred in many early industrial economies. That's why earlier Marxist works, especially Engels' The Condition of the Working Class in England, are even sadder than Violet Evergarden. It's the finest example of cognitive dissonance. The world goes full steam ahead, but the ordinary people feeling the progress, well, they don't. At first, it may be tempting to assume that organized labor pressure was the main force behind ending the crisis. But here, as with many other non-institutional theories of development, one nation stands out. It's the same nation that confuses geographic determinists, ardent world system believers, and culture decides everything enjoyers. The nation is, of course, Japan, an island country on the brink of the world, with limited fertile lands and industrial resources. And yet, this is how Asia looks in 1942, as her neighbors with almost the same culture and far better geography end up getting conquered by the by Japan herself, the first non-Western modern nation. And of course, it's also had no real labor movement. It's Japan after all. It's an honor to die from overworking here. And now imagine the situation being even worse back then. Yet, it managed to close the wage productivity gap all the same. So, if not for political pressure, what could be the cause for the pause unpausing? Recent research, mainly by great economist historian Robert Allen, indicates that the early industrial wage productivity gap is well within the domain of simple economic concepts like supply and demand for labor and capital. The core idea is as follows. Early industrial economies were constrained by both capital and labor. In Britain, wages were already high by pre-industrial standards. For example, English masons earned about 60% more on average than their French counterparts. With such high base wages, it's viable to invest in labor-saving machines, also known as capital, especially if they are coupled with cheap energy like Newcastle coal, which was mined off the Earth's surface, literally. But said capital is also very costly, because the technology and production aren't as developed yet, so you need the higher savings rates to keep industrializing. In that way, we have two forces at play here. Lower demand for labor, as machines substitute for it, and a high cost for the machines themselves, preventing the evil capitalists from spending on something else, including their consumption and the wages of their workers. As productivity by such min-maxing grows, more and more goods, including the machines, flood the market, pushing prices down and allowing workers to buy more. As workers' real incomes increase, now there is more demand, and you need to capture it by expanding your production. And with cheap machines, you go further, employing more people and buying more capital. But due to more hiring, labor becomes scarce, so you must offer higher wages to attract workers, and so on and so forth, with productivity ending high prices, labor becoming a resource to fight over, and cheap machines enabling unprecedented growth. The real wages finally catch up, clicking the play button after a long pause. Do non-economic factors, labor movements, lower tariffs achieved by lobbying, etc., influence this virtuous cycle? Sure, but we can't really measure to what degree. Even with all its advances, economic history is still very much constrained by the data. And given there were cases of unpausing where such factors weren't present, it might be better to assume that their role is secondary, and the economic factors are the primary drivers. So there you have it, early mainstream economic explanation of the unenviable fate of early industrial workers. Let's press F to those who suffered so we can live better, at least in terms of material wealth that is, and head to a bit speculative section. Is the pause truly a story of the past?
Money comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah.
It seems like a new pause has been unfolding for the last couple of decades. Wage productivity gap has been widening in the US and many developed economies ever since 1980, as the 1973 crisis prompted a shift from Keynesian economics that dominated the field during the golden era of capitalism to the neoliberal paradigm, also known as Reagan, Thatcher, or insert any other neocon politician nomics. Though it succeeded in solving supply-side problems, stabilizing inflation, and restarting productivity growth, they sacrificed labor's bargaining position, thus decreasing the share ordinary workers got in the national income distribution. While the early industrial pause was ended by mostly market forces, after which the institutions only solidified a more worker-oriented outcome, the post-industrial pause, I believe, would need a political solution from the get-go, because this situation is different from the one Engels described. First of all, the post-industrial economy relies heavily on economies of scale, and thus promotes very large corporations. If you had 30 or 50 workers in 19th century, you would be considered gargantuan. But now you would fall under the small or medium enterprise category. Market concentration is at all times high, switching from classic competitive structure to duopoly or monopoly in most capital-intensive sectors. The situation is even worse in tech. Google dominates in search, Meta in social apps, and Windows in OS. Secondly, the capital movement is far more globalized than ever before. If you wanted to evade some juicy 102% tax during the Cold War, you might have as well defected to the Warsaw Cap. All competent market economies were welfare states, and non-competent or non-market ones would not defend your property anyway. Now, should the government try to redistribute wealth by taxing the rich, the said rich would simply run to an offshore or less taxing economy, damaging the business climate in the meantime and depriving you of future international investors. You can find more reasons as to why the new pause will not be the same as the angels, but this topic deserves its own video. The general idea is that as markets become less and less competitive, their advantages for workers no longer apply, yet the failures persist. A laissez-faire approach would likely not close this gap this time, so a political solution would be needed.
Load 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt.
In conclusion, capitalism is great, really. There is a reason why most of the things we use daily were invented in market economies, and the world speaks in terms of trade and investment, instead of racial supremacy or class struggle. Yet, when its core feature of competition fails, everyone suffers. Markets were able to drag themselves out of the Engels pose, improving not only the productive capabilities of the society as a whole, but the livelihoods of ordinary people as well. Yet, I doubt they will do so the second time. Too different a situation we face today. Who knows what tomorrow will bring, but ever since steam brought machines to life, humanity has been better off with every new generation, and I hope this trend will never be reversed. I finally did it. Hope you enjoyed this video, at least to some degree. I will work on my questionable English and editing skills, I promise. If you want to do some casual learning, hit like and subscribe and get ready for further pseudo-historical shitposting on this channel. Thank you for watching.
I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my